For 5 years, he had been the building's most reliable, most effective manager. He solved every problem, managed every crisis, never panicked. But none of the residents knew anything about his past, until that evening, when an old colleague came to visit him. Before we continue with this powerful story of hidden intelligence and quiet expertise, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button and help us honor the silent professionals walking among us. The Riverside Towers stood 18 stories above the downtown district, a glass and steel monument to modern urban living that housed 127 families in carefully designed efficiency. Among the building's many employees, David Park occupied the most essential and least noticed position: apartment manager. For 5 years, he had been the invisible force that kept everything running smoothly, the man residents called when pipes burst, when neighbors complained, when life in a vertical community required someone to solve problems that city living created. At 46, David moved through the building with the quiet confidence of someone who understood systems, not just mechanical systems like heating and plumbing, but human systems, security protocols, and the intricate patterns of daily life that most people never consciously noticed. He was always professionally dressed in dark slacks and button-down shirts, always carried a tablet for tracking maintenance requests, and always seemed to know exactly what needed to be done before anyone asked. The residents of Riverside Towers regarded David as competent, reliable, and refreshingly drama-free. He fixed problems efficiently, mediated disputes fairly, and maintained the kind of professional distance that suggested someone who took his responsibilities seriously without getting emotionally involved in the complex social dynamics of apartment living. But there were aspects of David's management style that didn't quite fit the profile of a typical building superintendent. If anyone had been paying close enough attention to notice them, his response to maintenance requests followed patterns that seemed almost algorithmic in their precision. When Mrs. Chen in 4B complained about strange noises in the walls, David didn't just send a maintenance worker, he conducted what amounted to a systematic investigation, checking building plans, interviewing neighbors, and eliminating possibilities with the methodical thoroughness of someone trained to gather intelligence rather than just fix leaky pipes. His approach to building security went far beyond standard protocols. David knew not just the names of all 127 tenants, but their routines, their visitors, their work schedules, and the subtle changes in behavior that might indicate problems. He could spot a subletter masquerading as a legitimate tenant, identify domestic situations that might require intervention, and somehow always seemed to be present when the building needed additional security without ever appearing to patrol or surveil. Most telling was his crisis management style. When emergencies arose, power outages, plumbing failures, disputes between neighbors, David approached each situation with a calm analytical process that suggested training in high-pressure decision-making. He assessed threats, prioritized responses, and coordinated resources with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing far more complex operations than apartment building maintenance. The residents saw these qualities as evidence that they had lucked into an exceptionally competent building manager. What they didn't know was that David's competence had been developed over 15 years as a military intelligence analyst, specializing in urban security assessment and population monitoring for counterintelligence operations. David had spent his military career learning to read patterns in human behavior, to identify threats hidden within seemingly normal civilian populations, and to manage information-gathering operations that required him to blend invisibly into communities while maintaining constant awareness of security risks. The skills that had once helped him track foreign agents operating in American cities now helped him track down plumbing leaks and mediate noise complaints. The transition from military intelligence to apartment management hadn't been planned. After leaving the service, David had struggled to find civilian work that utilized his specialized training without requiring security clearances he no longer wanted to maintain. Building management had seemed like a logical fit. It required organizational skills, problem-solving abilities, and the kind of systematic thinking that military training had ingrained in him. What he hadn't expected was how much he would enjoy the work. After years of dealing with classified threats and abstract security concerns, there was something deeply satisfying about solving concrete problems for real people. When he fixed someone's heating system or resolved a dispute between neighbors, the results were immediate and tangible in ways that intelligence work had rarely provided. On the evening everything changed. David was completing his usual end-of-day routine. He had finished reviewing the building's security logs, updated maintenance schedules for the following week, and was preparing to lock up his office when the front desk phone rang. Riverside Towers. David speaking. David Park? The voice was familiar, though he hadn't heard it in over 3 years. Who's calling? Someone who worked the Jakarta station with you. I'm downstairs. We need to talk. David's professional demeanor didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle alteration in stance that suggested readiness rather than relaxation. I'll be right down. In the lobby, David found a woman in her early 40s wearing a tailored business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Agent Sarah Martinez looked exactly as she had during their deployment together, except for new lines around her eyes that suggested she was still working operations that aged people prematurely. Hello, David. You look domestic. Sarah, what brings you to my building? Can we talk somewhere private? David led her to his office, a small but well-organized space that reflected his preference for efficiency over comfort. As Sarah examined the maintenance schedules and resident files visible on his desk, he could see her processing information with the same analytical intensity she'd once applied to intelligence reports. So this is what you're doing now, building maintenance, property management, David corrected. It's more comprehensive than maintenance. I'm sure it is. Sarah sat down across from his desk. How much do your residents know about your background? Nothing relevant, as far as they're concerned. I'm someone who keeps their building running smoothly. And that's enough for you? After everything we did overseas? David studied her carefully. Sarah hadn't come here for a social visit, and she certainly hadn't tracked him down just to criticize his career choices. What do you need, Sarah? There's a situation. Someone we've been watching has taken up residence in your building, Unit 12A. David's expression didn't change, but his mind immediately began accessing everything he knew about the tenant in question. James Morrison, moved in 6 weeks ago, pays rent in cash, works in financial consulting, keeps regular hours, no visitors, no complaints from neighbors. Impressive recall, Sarah said. What else do you know about him? Nothing that would interest someone in your line of work. He's quiet, clean, and current on his rent. Model tenant. David. James Morrison is a cover identity. The man in 12A is Viktor Petrov, former GRU operative who's been selling classified information to Chinese intelligence services. We've been tracking him for 8 months, and we finally have enough evidence to move. But we need someone inside the building, someone who can provide access and intelligence without arousing suspicion. David was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that went far beyond apartment management. You want me to spy on my own tenant? I want you to do what you were trained to do: observe, assess, and provide intelligence that helps us neutralize a security threat. I don't do that anymore, maybe not officially. But you haven't stopped being who you are. I've seen your building security protocols, David. They're not standard property management procedures. They're counterintelligence measures adapted for civilian use. David couldn't deny the accuracy of her observation. His approach to building security did incorporate techniques he'd learned in military intelligence, though he convinced himself it was simply thorough professionalism rather than operational thinking. What exactly are you asking me to do? Monitor his communications, track his visitors, document his routines. Nothing illegal, Nothing that compromises your position here. Just be our eyes and ears until we're ready to move. And if I say no, then we bring in a team and turn your building into a crime scene. Your residents get traumatized, your reputation gets destroyed, and Victor disappears before we can roll up his entire network. David stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city lights that represented millions of people going about their lives without knowing about the shadow wars being fought around them. For 5 years, he'd been one of those people, someone living a normal life, solving normal problems, staying safely away from the world of classified operations and geopolitical chess games. But Sarah was right about one thing. He hadn't stopped being who he was. The skills were still there, the training was still active, and the understanding of how intelligence operations worked hadn't faded. If there really was a foreign agent operating in his building, putting his residents at risk, then maybe his responsibility as their manager extended beyond fixing their plumbing and mediating their disputes. How long do you need? 2 weeks, maybe less if he makes contact with his handlers. And after that, he disappears quietly, and your building goes back to normal. Your residents never know anything happened. David turned back to face her. I'll need guarantees. No operations inside the building that put civilians at risk. No surveillance equipment that compromises other tenants' privacy. And when this is over, you forget where to find me. Agreed. As Sarah prepared to leave, she paused at the door. David, it's good to see you haven't gone completely soft. The country still needs people like you, even if you're not wearing a uniform anymore. After she left, David sat alone in his office, staring at resident files that suddenly carried different implications. Tomorrow, he would have to look at Viktor Petrov not as a model tenant, but as a potential threat to national security. The quiet life he built managing apartment complexes was about to intersect with the shadow world he tried to leave behind. But as he began mentally reviewing everything he knew about the man in 12A, David realized that maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he'd never really stopped being an intelligence officer. Maybe he'd just found a different way to serve. Over the following days, David's routine remained outwardly unchanged, but his attention to detail intensified in ways that would have been invisible to casual observation. His daily building inspections took him past 12A at carefully varied times, allowing him to document Victor's schedule with the precision of professional surveillance. The intelligence picture that emerged confirmed Sarah's assessment. Victor maintained the appearance of a routine business consultant, but his communication patterns, visitor protocols, and security behaviors marked him as someone with operational training. David documented everything, building a profile that would help the operation succeed while ensuring his residents remain safe and unaware. When the arrest finally came, it was executed with the kind of surgical precision that David remembered from his military days. Victor was taken into custody during his morning coffee run, away from the building, with no drama or disturbance to affect the other tenants. By evening, 12A was empty, and by the following week, it was occupied by a new tenant, a genuine financial consultant with no connection to foreign intelligence services. David never heard from Sarah again, and he preferred it that way. He returned to managing Riverside Towers with the same professional competence he'd always shown, solving problems and maintaining the peaceful environment his residents expected. But he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the skills you think you've left behind turn out to be exactly the skills your community needs. So I ask you, have you ever discovered that someone in your everyday life possessed expertise that extended far beyond their apparent job description? Someone whose professional competence hinted at depths of experience you couldn't have imagined? Share their story in the comments, because sometimes the most valuable skills are the ones that operate quietly in the background. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us honor the quiet professionals who use their expertise to keep our communities safe, because sometimes the most important work is done by people whose real qualifications must remain invisible. And next time you encounter exceptional competence in an ordinary setting, Remember that excellence often comes from experience that can't be listed on a resume.